Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. I want to thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathy Gorman. I'm the Executive Vice President of Patient Care Services and Chief Operating Officer, and it gives me great privilege to welcome you to this very important Grand Rounds this week as we celebrate and recognize Patient Experience Week. This is our 5th annual Patient and Family Experience Week, and I want to really recognize Melissa Winter and Martha Para and the entire team for making sure that we're always staying focused on our patients and families, and that is exactly why we're here every single day, is to deliver outstanding care, to make sure that their experience is everything that they want it to be and that we hope it will be. With that, as many of you may know, it was really about 2 years ago when Dr. Newman kind of set the tone for us, and the auditorium was packed, and we had Amanda Leland here, which was a parent who talked about her experience and how we could actually do better. And from there, we've been pushing forth on this trajectory to go from good to great. And I think we're making exceptional progress, but we still have a ways to go in terms of the gaps that we can do better for our patients and families. And so today is an opportunity for us to do just that. We've had presentations this week, throughout the week. On Monday, we heard from some of our teenagers, our teenage patients, who gave us great insight to what's working and what we could do better. Yesterday, we heard from some of the improvement work that's ongoing using our lean techniques and processes to advance the care. And today, we're going to talk about a very important topic, and that's around cultural diversity and inclusion. And this is really continuing on a conversation we had a year ago around this, where we had Dr. Tiffany Johnson here last year to talk about implicit racial bias. And so today, we have an opportunity to hear from Hope Fuller, who is an expert in this field, and learn a little bit more about this. But as we think about cultural diversity and inclusion, I want to recognize, not to exclude the men, but all the women in the audience, because it is International Women's Day. And thank you for being here and coming to work to deliver the great care that we give to our patients and families, because we couldn't do it without our women. So thank you. And men, I'm sure there's a day coming for you too. Just wait. So with that, it gives me great privilege to introduce our speaker today, Ms. Hope Fuller. And she's going to talk with us about compassion across cultures to meet the needs of all. Ms. Fuller is the CEO and principal consultant of Inspire Management Consultants, a human capital consulting firm focused on diversity and inclusion. She has more than 25 years experience in working in both private and public sectors, where she's gained a lot of great experience in affirmative employment action, human capital management, and diversity and inclusion management. And currently, Ms. Fuller is on her daytime job. It works at the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporate Office, which is PBGC, say that fast, right, which is in the government. And previous to that, she worked for the EEOC. So she has a lot of insight on things that we could be doing better, not only for our patients and families, but also for our employees. So she has a bachelor's degree in accounting. We go from accounting, I was talking with her earlier, going from accounting to, and then a master's degree in organizational development. So a full spectrum to really understand how to use data to really drive the organization and development in a different way. And she has a certificate from Georgetown University in Strategic Diversity and Inclusion Management. So she's highly qualified to come and talk with us about this very important topic. And Hope, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Good morning, and thank you so much for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to thank you all first before I start, because the work you do is so very important. When I was a child, I was sickly, and I was in the hospital a lot, and so I had great nurses and doctors to care for me. I was a little girl that would summons the nurse with a little bell and request a popsicle and root beer, and I was always treated with really great care, and they managed me well, so I'm very grateful to be here. Like you mentioned, I work for the government, and I used to work for the EEOC. And the EEOC was established as a result of the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And their mission was to remedy unlawful employment discrimination. And this agency policed the federal government regarding employment discrimination. They provided rules and regulations, they provided guidance, and they were the ones that made sure that other federal agencies and state governments were hiring with the focus on equity and inclusion. But you know what? The EEOC still had claims and findings of discrimination, and that was due to the fact that the individual behavior of their workforce. And so it's very important that we realize how we impact our workplaces. Am I doing this wrong? I can do that. Yep. Thank you. That's no problem. Okay, so what does all that story about the EEOC have to do with cultural competency? It's important that an organization has a demonstrated commitment from its leadership, that there are policies, that there are procedures in place, that there is a management accountability to support inclusion. But the most important thing is how we as individuals show up and what we bring to our interactions with our peers and with those we serve. It's important that we take responsibility to exemplify compassion across cultures. So we're going to turn the magnifying glass on ourselves today. My objectives are to provide an overview of culture and cultural competency, to identify the importance of self-evaluation in the journey to cultural competence, and to identify tools to assist you in becoming more culturally competent. So before we talk about cultural competency, we'll discuss culture. And we know that culture, it's the values, the beliefs, the behaviors, our objects, our traditions, and other characteristics common to members of a particular group or society. It guides our thinking, the decisions we make, and it supports us in a patterned, instinctive way. It structures the way people view and organize their world. It influences ideas about relationships, how people live their lives, whether a social event is appropriate or inappropriate. And we belong to multiple cultural groups, and we negotiate multiple cultural expectations on a daily basis. I'm a woman, I'm Black, I don't have a disability, I have an education, and you may encounter a woman that's Black without a disability, with education, but how she embraces her cultural heritage is unique. It's unique, and there's variations and diversity across and within races, ethnicities, and cultural heritage. Let's see, the next slide is this, and who hasn't seen this iceberg analogy? It's for everything. I was telling Melissa earlier, I saw one on sugar consumption, and so people see this all the time. But again, our behaviors are the things that people can see, and then our culture and our values are the things that are deeply embedded, and they're unconscious. There are many definitions for cultural competence. When I engage with an individual, it's me appropriately responding to their cultural variables, and how you respond to the cultural variables of your patients is important. How you respond to their age, their ethnicity, their linguistic background, their socioeconomic status These are all things that impact an organization and impact the culture of it. But cultural competence in healthcare is the ability of individuals and systems to respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures in a manner that affirms the worth and preserves the dignity of individuals, families, and communities. As healthcare practitioners, it's important that you become familiar with the healthcare beliefs of your patients because that impacts your ability to deliver quality care. You don't have to master everyone's culture. That's impossible. But just making yourself familiar, and it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a continual process. And so it's important that you understand or become familiar with cultural benefits. In some cultures, there's a distrust of white healthcare providers. And in some cultures, doctors are seen as educated experts deserving of praise and high status, and patients want to please their doctors. So they may agree and head nod and smile to whatever the doctor is saying, even though they may not understand what he's saying. And in the American culture, our head nods, this means yes, and this the other way means no. But in some cultures, it's the opposite. It has the opposite meaning. And so it's important that you get those kind of nuanced things when you're dealing with people from across the race and ethnic and national origins. Some cultures are more comfortable with the same-sex healthcare providers, while some require like detailed explanations of tests and procedures. And we could go on and on and on. And I actually provided a list, a reference tool for you that lists various cultural groups and their norms, health belief norms, and just their different beliefs and practices. Cultural competence enables people to be effective with people from their own cultures and their own. So why is this important to children? Because your mission is a fantastic mission. Your mission is, as the nation's children's hospital, Children's National Health System aims to excel in clinical care, advocacy, research, and education. We provide a quality healthcare experience for our patients and their families. We also improve health outcomes for children and lead in the creation of innovative solutions to pediatric health challenges. And so when I saw that, what jumped out at me was the healthcare experience. And experience is defined as the process or fact of personally observing, encountering, or undergoing something. And in healthcare, it's the human-centered interactions that make that experience. So I understand from Melissa that a team has been working on developing your organizational values. And some of you may have been involved in that process. Key values identified so far include diversity and respect. Cultural competence acknowledges that diversity exists and respects the difference. It creates compassion, and compassion mitigates judgment. You can't be compassionate or have compassion for someone and then judge them. So when you exemplify cultural competence, it allows you to be of service to your peers and provide that quality healthcare experience. So we're going to talk about your workforce. We have some slides that will show the representation rates of your different employees and the different fields of employment. So this slide shows your workforce for your major occupations by race and ethnicity. On the side, you can see the breakdown of race and ethnicity, and then across you see the different the fields. And you have a representation of almost every ethnicity and race in this group. But within each group, there are cultures. Clinical associates have a different culture, from your administrative staff, from your faculty, from your managers, and so on, from your healthcare providers. And it's just important to, while this is just a chart, to know the impact of your interactions with your different colleagues. These are your occupations by age. And so, again, the most of your, it varies dependent upon the kind of role you play in the organization. but you have a large percentage of 36 and 45-year-olds within the agency, and I think those are millennials. 45 to 60-year-olds, those are Gen X or some traditionalists or baby boomers. So you have within those different groups, there are cultural things that are specific to them. Those cohorts have different values. They work, they have different ideas about work, and so it's just important that when you are interacting with your peers that are from different age groups, gender, that you're just mindful of your interaction and you exhibit compassion and extend that courtesy to your peers. Occupation by gender. Females are in blue and males are in red. And females have a higher rate of representation within most of the positions in this agency. And so when you're working, it's just, there are differences in how we interact. And so this is just to help you be mindful of who you're working with, and it could help inform how you interact. The last slide is your occupations by tenure. Again, the majority of the employees have worked here between 7 and 15 years, 0 to 3 years, depending on the role they play in the organization. But you have there's a large range from 0 to 3 years to 25 years. So again, that can help you be mindful of your succession planning, how you recruit, and how you make your decisions when you are planning for future for succession. The next group we have, we're going to look at your patient demographics. And I have two charts, and the inpatient chart is the 5-year trend by percentage, and your outpatient, which is your emergency room, that's also 5-year trend by percentage. And when you look at the two different charts, they're pretty consistent. When you look at the gender, male and female, they're consistent. When you look at the age range, 0 to 17, 18, and 44, that's consistent. And even Hispanic, or the ethnicities, Hispanic or non-Hispanic, those are pretty consistent. However, when you look at the locations, like D.C., Maryland, Virginia, or other, or the race, there tends to be a slight change in your patient base for inpatient and outpatient. So those are just things that you could be mindful of. And we can talk about the difference in these two in a later slide. This is just information on the people you serve and their demographics. So the importance of self-evaluation on the journey to cultural competence. Everyone should understand his or her own culture and the values and how it connects to your worldview. You should appreciate your own multiple identities and recognize the certain influences in your background. And then you can also understand how your culture and worldview shapes your perceptions of other people's culture and determines how you interact with them. This understanding can help create more compassion amongst the culture. And socialization plays a primary role in that. It's our primary method of learning. It shapes and defines our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. When we're born, we're socialized. You're a boy or a girl. You're going to wear pink or blue. You're going to play with a doll or a truck. We learn how to fit in. And then it determines boundaries, what's right, what's wrong. And we have all of this available information. We observe it, we interpret it, and then we draw our conclusions. And we see the world through our life stories. And those stories inform our worldview. So these are sunshades, and each of us has a worldview, a way in which we interpret and understand everything around us. It's been compared to seeing the world through your own unique pair of sunglasses. and the tint on your glasses are different from everyone else's, and it shapes the way you see the world and everything around you. And each of us develop our own tint to our sunglasses through our family, our cultural heritage, and other experiences. And how we are socialized informs our perceptions, and it also contributes to implicit bias. That bias can predict behavior, and it impacts the decisions we make in healthcare. And in healthcare, those decisions and the results could diminish one's healthcare experience, which may have a damaging effect on healthcare disparities in communities of color and the children in those communities that you serve. Now, this slide was taken from Dr. Tiffany Johnson's presentation on an examining implicit racial bias in healthcare. And I had the privilege of looking at her presentation, and it was very, it was impactful. And if you haven't seen it, please look at it. And if you've seen it, look at it again, because it was very, it was a very great presentation. And the data on this slide, it was taken from hers, and it shows how the impact of implicit bias and racial difference. And I'm not going to go through each of the things identified, but this shows just the ill effects of having that bias. Dr. Johnson her research measured pro-white bias and found that resident physicians and pediatric residents are susceptible to implicit bias against Black babies and other children of color. The American Academy of Pediatrics found that racial and ethnic disparities in children's health and healthcare are quite extensive, pervasive, and persistent, and occur across the spectrum of healthcare. So the need for cultural competence is critical. We're going to do an activity, and I think you were all handed out a sheet when you walked in, and so it's about your story. And I want you to take a few minutes and answer each question. What were you taught about a group you belong to? How did that shape your value and belief system? And how does that impact the way you administer compassion to your colleagues and to your patients? So I'm asking you to take a few minutes, and then hopefully I can get 2 people to volunteer and share what they've written. Would anybody volunteer to share? No? Fine. You will? Okay, stand up, please.
Hi. I'm a woman, and traditionally I was taught that I should have a supportive and subordinate role to men. And so, should I go through everything?
Yeah.
So I think that led to, I'm not sure that this exactly addresses your question, but to a desire to defy that, that idea. And I think that impacts my compassion in the sense that I have greater empathy towards women who might be, oppressed or.
Thank you. And that's when you look at groups, male and female, the focus of the oppression would be the female. And so you wanting to defy that and having the empathy towards groups, I guess you said are oppressed with, is how you exhibit your compassion with your, across cultures, with your colleagues and other people that you serve. So that's important, so thank you for that. Do we have anyone else that's willing to share? Okay.
Hi. So the group that I belong to, I'm Iranian American.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that my family always told me is always respect your elders.
Mm-hmm.
So how that shape your value belief system. Listen and learn from those that may not have a lot in common with you in terms of like how they look or what their interests are or whatever. And that's just kind of a natural transition into how you administer cultural compassion to patients, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You've used your experience and how you were taught to respect your elders to create that level of cultural competency to get an understanding of someone else's perspective. And so that's what the key is when we are working on being more culturally competent, to be able to be in pain or to understand someone's position without any judgment, but just being accepting and respecting the difference. So thank you for sharing. So how do you develop behaviors to become more culturally competent? So I was in the hospital 2 years ago. I had adhesions, and so I was in the hospital for 9 days, and there was a gentleman down the hall. He was older and of Hispanic ethnicity. And for about an hour one day, I heard him crying at the top of his lungs, agua, agua, agua. He wanted water. And so it seems obvious that everybody heard him, but of course I summoned the nurse, and she came, and I was like, I think the gentleman wants water. And she was very patient. She didn't yell or roll her eyes. She just said, okay. She told me. She said, Miss, he has a pitcher of ice water on his nightstand. And I said, oh, okay. Go back to doing me. But after with further research, I understood that in some Hispanic cultures, ice water has no therapeutic value. And so it's those little nuanced things that when we become more familiar with the diversity of cultures, it makes an impact. Had she known that, perhaps she would have just given him some water and he wouldn't have been in pain or torture for an hour. And so it's just very important that we become familiar. So first you have to understand the importance of cultural competence. It decreases racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare. It reduces barriers to understanding between staff and patients, and had, like I said before, had she been aware that the therapeutic icing was something that the Hispanic culture doesn't necessarily see as value, perhaps it could have averted that situation a little longer. It creates more effective collaboration with handoff of care between your healthcare practitioners and your colleagues, and you're able to create and have a greater understanding of the central role of culture in healthcare. Acknowledge your potential for bias. We are products of our cultural conditioning and can be prone to engage in behaviors that hinder compassion across cultures. Acknowledge your assumptions and your biases about other cultures. Strive to understand how these assumptions affect your ability to provide culturally responsive services to clients from diverse backgrounds. And acknowledge the need for more training related to the populations you serve. Don't stereotype, don't filter your interactions through a biased lens without gauging in a self-reflection or examining the impact of bias. Don't use the dominant culture as the norm for assessment and treatment planning. Don't minimize the need for culture-specific care. And don't negate culture by stating that there are no essential differences and that everyone experiences discrimination. And don't diminish your colleagues by making a judgment about his or her competence due to some aspect of their culture. So we understand, we are acknowledging that we all have the potential to have bias. So now we need to create practices to assess, manage, reduce bias, and increase cultural competence and compassion. Create a postmortem of your past treatment plans, hiring, if that's what you do, if you work in administration and you're an HR person, of how you hire, the assignments you give out, and that way you can kind of track your behavior, and maybe you can identify a trend in the things you do. And track your behavior over the course of a month so you can see, you know what, all I'm hiring are Black women, or I'm giving assignments to people who look like me, or, whatever your treatment plans. According to Dr. Johnson's research, there's bias in healthcare against children. And if you're not, you see them and you don't prescribe the kind of treatment they need, and if you do that over the course of a month, if you track your behavior over the course of the month, maybe you'll identify trends. Identify biases that may be influencing your decision-making. Like I said earlier, whatever you are responsible for, track your behavior. Use a cultural norm tracking sheet to help you become familiar with preferences of patients from diverse backgrounds. And I've included a little booklet that you can go and pull off the internet that identifies the cultural preferences for certain groups. So that could be a useful tool. You can also interview a peer from a different background. Melissa Winter, a couple years ago, I was here and I gave an assignment. I've also included as homework for you today, but it was about becoming familiar with your colleagues. Would you like to share your experience?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Winter, the Program Director of Service Excellence, or Patient Satisfaction, so one of the executive sponsors of today's Grand Rounds. And a few years ago, when Hope was here, she spoke with our Power of One coaches, who are people who champion at the grassroots patient safety and patient experience. And Hope did similarly, challenged us to look at ourselves and the biases that we may have, and to get to know somebody else from a different culture. And so another peer who was in the group had participated in the session. So I went up to him and I said, hey, I'm going to be really transparent. I'm from a really small town. I grew up on a road that's named after my step-grandfather. I grew up very isolated. I don't know anything about your culture, and I would like to know more. Is it okay if we spend some time over the next few months with me asking you very open questions that may not be appropriate to say, and I'm sorry if I say it the wrong way. I don't mean to be offensive. And he was so open to it. And so I was able to learn about his culture, his beliefs, and it really helped open my mind and my worldview and change how I see other people. So I encourage you to do the same thing.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for sharing. And finally, embed practices in your formal process. Ask. That's just a simple thing, is to ask the question. I had a client who is a speech pathologist, and she has a thriving practice, but she wanted to be more culturally competent. And she asked me what she could do to assist her in that. And I told her, just simply ask your clients, is there something I need to know or be mindful of about your culture? And she told me that the parent was like, no one's ever asked me that, and thanked her for it. So it's those simple things that you can do to make it a part of your practice. Ask. Show respect. When you're dealing with some cultures, don't call an older person by their first name. Make it a process that you address all of your parents by Mr. or Mrs. That's just the basic thing that you can do as part of your process. Have compassion and don't judge. Like I said earlier, if you have compassion, you can judge. You're too busy, feeling what they're feeling. So have that just be a part. Like, I'm not going to judge. I'm going to live by the golden rule and treat people the way I want to be treated, with respect and with compassion. And recognize nonverbal clues. Body language speaks a lot. And so if you see body language that maybe identifies that someone is uncomfortable, just ask probing questions to get a greater understanding of what's going on. Respond to emotional concerns, again, nonverbal clues. Perform an after-action review. After you work with a client or you're working with your colleague, just kind of assess the interaction and make that a part of your process. Just like, did I respond, or what was I feeling? When she comes to my office, I get annoyed, and just kind of try to understand where that's coming from, and just keep asking the why. Like, why am I feeling this? Just keep asking why, and eventually you can get to the bottom of why you're feeling and identify some issue that you may have. Have emotional intelligence. That's your ability to recognize your own and other people's emotion, and it helps guide your thinking and your behavior. So like I said, becoming culturally competent is a developmental and ongoing process. It's rooted in respect and validation. This is just a snowflake on the iceberg, on that iceberg we saw earlier. And it's just, create a plan for how you can create educational learning to become more culturally competent. Let's see. So you have homework, behavior tracking. For the next 4 weeks, write down your first thoughts when you encounter someone with a worldview different than your own, and that should be included on the sheet you have. Are you judging or making assessments about what you see? Acknowledge your reactions. Think about the experience that shaped your view. Acknowledge that that individual had experiences that shaped his or her view. And track your behavior in a journal. Have you noticed a pattern in how you react to certain groups? And what new perspective could you take the next time you encounter those groups? Your next homework assignment is the one that I gave Melissa. You list the 6 cultural groups with which you identify. You select one of the cultural groups that represents a prominent identity for you. And what are 3 things about being a member of that group that you enjoy? What are 3 things about being a member of that group that are difficult? What are the 3 stereotypes about your cultural group that are incorrect and you want to change? And what are 3 things that you hope nobody ever says or does again regarding your cultural group? This is just about getting clear about who you are, because that's key in understanding being culturally competent, knowing your culture first. So this is another homework exercise for you to do. Additional resources include the book I referenced. It is a book of tips for clinicians, and it's designed to increase your awareness and concepts and preferences of patients from diverse cultures. There's a book, Cultural Competency Skills for Health Professionals. Project Implicit, Harvard, is a test where you can measure different biases, gender, race, ethnicity, different things. And there's also another hidden bias self-assessment test that you can take. In addition, there's a reference that would be on the internet, and it's called, the title of it is The Role of Cultural Competence in Delivering Positive Patient Experiences by the Burrell Institute. And that's on the internet, and that's a reference for you to use, so please do so. this is about the differences in workplace and in the workplace. Earlier, I showed you the difference with your demographics, and this could be a reference sheet as you become more competent working across generations. A cultural tendency sheet, it's just norms, it's their tendencies, but not everyone in the culture exhibits the same tendency. So just use this as a norm sheet. And that's it. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Thank you for that very insightful presentation. And as you can hear from my accent, some people understand it, others don't. I'm Dr. Ogunlesi. I'm one of the pulmonologists here. This is a very provocative topic that most people will identify with, but I want to share one experience with everyone. And I'm going to stand here and look at everyone, because it was very profound, and in times like this, it becomes even more important to know these things happening around us. And this happened in our pulmonary clinic. All the pulmonologists here, hands up. And Dr. Perez was actually one of those who experienced this. A parent came in with her child, African-American, and one of the fellows who has a very thick Indian accent went into the room and took the history and said, I'll get my attending, which took a little time, so Dr. Rambam was going to get the time that we wasted in the patient's time and all that. And then comes in Dr. Perez, who has another Spanish accent. And this parent went off about all these doctors who have accents and who are not American, and she didn't want to see any one of them. And Dr. Perez thought, oh, I'm the attending, she'll listen to me. She went off on him as well. Tim is here, and security was called, and but these are the kinds of disparities that are prevalent even more so today. And some of you would see me in the hallways, and they will identify with Dr. O yelling, because in Nigeria, we all yell. You know, we don't know we're yelling. We think we're just being very assertive. And somebody actually mentioned the other day, she interviewed a Nigerian residency candidate and got a very strong handshake. And I said, well, that's the way we assert ourselves. But I think these are important things to know, that in this environment, especially here at Children, that we have such diversity that has been embraced. And there's one thing I would like to add to the list of things that were mentioned, highlighting one, respect, but more importantly, support. I don't think we could have gotten better support than what Dr. Newman, the email he sent out at the beginning of this whole saga with, you know, our government and immigration, and knowing that everyone here is welcome and accepted. And I think that, to me, brought so much, not just the acceptance, but it gave us some peace of mind. We just heard the Iranian American who he felt comfortable identifying himself in this grand round. And I think that goes a long way. Maybe in another environment he would not be able to. But in the pulmonary clinic that day, the nurse manager came forward, who is American. The only doctor who could have seen that patient that day is Dr. Cheney, because the whole pulmonary division is so diverse. If there was a diversity day, there would be no doctors in that clinic to see anyone except Dr. Cheney. But I just think this is such an important topic, especially when we have to deal with patients, and we should support each other in these diversities when we have to deal with our patients as well. Thank you.
Anyone else? Comments? Questions?
Hope. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Martha Parra, the Vice President of Clinical Support Services, who's been partnering with Melissa and her team on the Activities for Patient Experience Week. I want to thank Hope Fuller for being here with us today to really provide us a perspective on the importance of really having compassion that commits us to the care that we do provide here and connects us to our families. I think I've been in a couple of other children's hospitals, and when I came to Children's National as a diverse leader myself, I was really struck by our ability to embrace differences because we really do serve a very, very wide-ranging of patients and families. So I think this topic is really important as we think about the work that we do to really improve our patient and family experience. So I thank all of you for taking your time this morning to be with us, and I thank Hope for her important words, and muchas gracias por estar con nosotros esta mañana.
Thank you, Martha. I assume you were just introducing me. Thank you. This is the third day of Patient and Family Experience Week, and we got kicked off Monday with some of our patients, and it was really, I don't know if you all knew this, but one of the patients was a teenager, and she said, despite a lot of other problems we have, we are probably a leader in not having our teenagers have to take off their finger polish for surgery. Did you know that? I didn't know that. So it's amazing some of the things you learn, and that's a lead-in to, and Sade, thank you, because when you are forceful with me, I thought you were really being forceful. Now I know I can ignore that, and it's your form of tough love, and I appreciate that. But it came back to me in another way. I don't know if you all know what 23andMe is. So this is now a kind of a service or a lab test. You can get a swab of your saliva. It's got cells in it. You send it off, and you get your whole genetic background. And so our family was given this for the holidays. So we've done that, and the results just have started coming back. Now, I haven't gotten mine back yet, but my wife, Allison, got hers back, and we were going through it. And you realize that what you look like or what you think you are is very, very different. So we've been trying to work through the fact that she had a lot of Neanderthal that was in her genome, and it was a shock to me. I never knew that. And so I think it just goes to show that we're really not necessarily who we're formed by a lot of different things. And it all goes into making each of us up, but there's a lot we share in common and a lot we don't even know about each other. And this was a wonderful presentation to remind us that we do need to be open and think about the things that bring us together, not the things that separate us. And so to the team, Melissa, Kathy, Martha, terrific week, and we look forward to the rest of the week, but it's just a week, and we need to celebrate and embrace these things all year round. So thank you very much. Please don't, when you see Allison, please don't say anything that I shared that. She's still trying to work through all of that. So, thank you.
Hope, we have a question on WebEx from one of our WebEx viewers. This is from, and I apologize if I get the name wrong, Pradnia. What do you advise in terms of addressing microaggressions in the workplace?
Yeah, microaggressions, those are those like assaults. It could be a insult, an assault, like I'm microaggressing you, but it's intentional. So microaggressions in the workplace, I would, I think it's about having a conversation with the person to get an understanding so you can address whatever their issues may be with you. That's an option. For me, when I'm microaggressed, and I have been in the past, initially my first instinct is to kind of remove myself from the situation, because if you have an issue, that is your issue, and it's not about me. That's your own personal thing. But when you notice a pattern of behavior, I think it becomes okay to have a conversation. If you have some aggression or an issue with me, it's yours until I notice the pattern, and it may impact me. So I believe that initially, for my truth is to ignore until it impacts me on a basis that it's continuous, and it becomes to it turns into an assault. So yeah. Anyone else? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.